When it comes to hormones, metabolism, and midlife weight changes, most women are looking in all the usual places: thyroid, cortisol, estrogen, progesterone. But one of the biggest drivers of all of it is often hiding in plain sight: your gut. Your gut microbiome plays a massive role in everything from how you metabolize estrogen to how efficiently you burn fat, regulate inflammation, and even respond to stress. And when that system gets disrupted, as it does for most women during perimenopause and menopause, you can feel like your whole body has turned against you. Today, we're cutting through the noise and getting straight into the science of why the gut hormone connection is so powerful and what you can actually do to support your gut microbiome so your hormones, your metabolism can finally work with you instead of against you. And I cannot think of a better person to help us do that than today's guest. Kiran Krishnan is a research microbiologist and true leader in the health and wellness space. He has a rare gift for taking incredibly complex science and making it understandable, practical, and actually fun to learn. Well, at least I think it's fun to learn. Over the last 2 decades, he's founded and grown multiple successful health and supplement companies, including co-founding and leading Microbiome Labs, the preeminent microbiome-focused therapeutic brand used by health practitioners around the world. Kiran, welcome to the show, and I am so excited to dive into this with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
And I should add to your bio, because you didn't actually have it
Mhm.
in there, but that you're also part of Endo Access, which is one of my newest favorite companies that you introduced me to at what was it? Health Optimization Summit. Was that what it
Yes.
was?
I
Yes.
think it was in Austin. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
to a couple so this
Many
year. So
months ago. So it's crazy how fast time has flown by, right?
oh,
Because that was what
it
that
was
was like.
April.
Yes, it's crazy. And here we are at Christmas time almost.
Yeah,
So
and it was funny because when we were there, my girlfriend Danielle Hamilton, we when we go to these conferences, we don't often actually go watch the speakers
mhm.
because we know a lot of them, we've seen a lot of their stuff, but we're really there to kind of mingle and meet all of our colleagues in person and go around to all the booths and chit chat, and we do a lot of yapping when we go to these things. But she was like, I have to go see this guy talk. He's amazing. And I'm like, oh, it's about the gut microbiome. I'm like, oh, yeah, I've been there, but sure, I'll go with you. And then I like the whole time I was watching you, my jaws like dropped. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I love this guy. I love what he's talking about. Like you were teaching me things that I had never heard before. And I'm like, I got to get this guy on my podcast. And then we got to meet. And then you told me about Endo Access, which is one
Yes.
of a kind. It really is.
Yes.
So maybe you could just explain what endo access is. And I've been using it
Yeah.
just so everybody knows. I use it all the time.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. And it was such a pleasure to meet you. I'd heard of you before, and I'm so glad we got to run into each other. And you were the perfect person to run into because
Yeah.
your life is around fixing hormones. And so, when I founded Microbiome Labs in 2013, the whole idea behind it was about solving big problems in the gut, right? And at that
Hmm.
time, the two big problems that I saw was like this delineation and downward spiraling of probiotic formulations. People were kind of going in this really nonsensical direction in how they were putting together probiotics. It was just more is better, and let's just throw as many cheap strains as possible in a product. No studies behind any of their products. And then the other problem was leaky gut. Leaky gut is so profoundly, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about that to
Hmm.
some degree today. And so we became very determined to fix those two problems. So we ended up creating Megaspore Biotic, which has become the number one selling practitioner probiotic, certainly in the US, maybe even in Canada as well. And then we published and showed that we had a resolution to leaky gut. We've published a number of studies on that. So then, when I sold Microbiome Labs and looked at other big problems, one glaring problem was hormones. right? And women's health in general. And then there are pioneers like yourself that have been chipping away to help women understand and help clinicians understand the complexities of this and how you navigate all of this. So we said, okay, can we bring some of our capabilities to try to help with this problem? And so the Dutch test, which you use,
Hmm.
is one that we honed in on because we said, well, that test gives you the most detailed information about what's happening with your hormones metabolically,
Yep.
right? And that's what you really need to know, right? You really need to know how your body is handling the hormones because they can go in multiple directions. And then what is the connection between all of them, right? Connecting all those dots. Then, as we started looking into the Dutch test, we said, well, the problem is most clinicians have a very hard time really understanding everything it can tell you, right? There are 33 endpoints, there's multiple pages. How do you connect all those dots? And so we decided that we wanted to bring some technology to help really discern all of the complexities that you can understand from this very good test called the Dutch test. And so we found some of the top hormone experts. We first started working with Carrie Jones, who you might
Yep.
know, right? And then we found somebody that you've talked to now a couple times who is like the absolute savant on hormones, metabolism, biochemistry, genetics, and Dr. Liz Bartman. And we said, okay, all we have to do is codify Liz's brain, and we
That's
could
all.
solve this issue, right? That's if Liz could sit next to every practitioner when they're looking at the Dutch report, we would be able to resolve a lot of the complications. So we
Yeah.
said, how do we make that happen? So we went through the report and Liz went through it and we looked at every single variable, how what the literature says about it, how it connects to every other variable, and we created a very complex clinical algorithm. So it's not an AI-based program. That's where most people assume it's not, because if you tap into AI, those large language models, it'll pull a lot of nonsense from the internet that doesn't make any sense, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's not an AI model, it's an algorithm, it's calculations, formulas that we have painstakingly put together, and there's over 200,000 lines of code
That's
in it,
crazy.
right? So it's effectively Liz's brain codified in an algorithm. And then Liz spent countless months looking at, I think, almost 2,000 Dutch reports, right? First going through the algorithm, then she reviews it and makes sure all the algorithm outputs are actually correct. And anywhere where we found potential errors, we would have to go back to the development team, go into the code, and make the adjustments there, right? So that was a very painstaking 1.5 year long process that myself and my co-founder at Microbiome Labs, Tom, and then a third hormone practicing doctor, Dr. Guy Citron, we all kind of invested and focused our time in that and kind of gave Liz the opportunity to do that work. And so all of that has turned out to this amazing system, EndoAxis, that is 99.999% accurate. Uh, thank thankfully to all of Liz's hard work, and now is helping countless clinicians really get much deeper and much more clear into the hormone patterns. And Liz probably told you, I mean, like the complexities we found are even bigger than we thought, right? Like
Oh my
right,
goodness.
for
Yeah.
women, I think there's over 400 different patterns that we can find of dysfunction. And even just estrogen dominance alone, there's over 100 different types of estrogen dominance. So this is the one
Crazy.
place where you really need some targeted therapeutics.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
identifying the pattern first becomes an important step. So yeah, it was super exciting to be able to build Endo Access. And I'm very grateful that you took a look at it and are using it well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I've had Liz on the show, you guys, and I was just telling Kiran that this was one of my favorite interviews that I've ever done on this show because I've never actually met somebody so brilliant when it came to hormones and the genetics and the metabolite testing. And most practitioners really don't get a grasp on the Dutch test. That's what I find. I have a lot of people that actually come to me with their Dutch test results from another physician and say, this
Yeah.
isn't good enough. Can you now go through it? And I give them a whole different outlook on their test results. And so I know that most, not most, but I think a lot of practitioners really don't get how much the Dutch test could be telling them. And so with endo access and pairing that with my knowledge, it's just
Mhm.
been a game changer. So I'm so happy that you guys did that because yeah, you're right. We can extract so much more than what we were doing from these tests.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then as we're building the data sets, right? So now I think we've gone through over 5,000 Dutch tests and we have data from all of it. And so one of the things that we can do is start to really learn from that
Hmm.
information as to the prevalence of certain pathways and dysfunctions, and then relate that to metadata around symptoms and demographics and diet and all of that. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to make us smarter over time,
Hmm.
and make better connections to what's happening in your environment, in your dietary choices, in your lifestyle that's starting to drive some of these pathologies and activate certain pathways, that we could be even more preventative about it, right?
Yep.
And start modulating some of those behaviors in your 30s, so
Hmm.
that when the perimenopause hits in the 40s and sometimes in the 30s for some people, that it's less of a fall off the cliff kind of experience, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we want hormones to be easy. And
Mhm.
sometimes they are, you hit perimenopause, menopause, it's like, here's your hormones. And that person's like, immediately they feel so much better. All their symptoms are gone, and that's it. But it's just becoming more and more complicated. And we're seeing these complicated cases where it's not easy. Women put their hormones on and they gain weight, they get bloated, they get breast tenderness, they don't feel well, their mental state can kind of go haywire. And then they immediately think, oh, hormones aren't for me. That's it.
Mhm.
Nope, that didn't work. And it's like, actually, those hormones are typically great. It's just that your body is not metabolic. Something else is going on. And this is your sign that you need to look deeper and look at different systems in the body to see how they're working. And number one is the gut,
Yeah. Exactly.
right?
And I think that's a great reason why it's getting more complicated for more people, because our guts
Are
are
getting,
systematically getting worse, right,
yep,
over time
yep,
because of
yep.
our lifestyle, our world that we live in. So yeah, it makes sense. And when we get into the connection between the gut and hormones and what's naturally happening already in a perimenopausal gut, it'll start to make sense for people why the gut is playing such a big role here.
What is the state of our gut right now? Like, and for most people, Kiran, are we just in a horrible state? Does everybody have leaky gut no matter how healthy you are because of the environment? Like, what state are we in right now when it comes to the gut microbiome?
Yeah, so generally, when we look at large cohorts of stool testing to understand what kind of ecological patterns we're seeing in the westernized world, right? What we're seeing that is grim, that is not very great for our future as a species. And not to be hyperbolic about it at all, but it's truly a existential issue for us as a species, is we're seeing a steady decline in the diversity of the gut microbiome. And I'll give you
Hmm.
some specific numbers to chew on. And then we're also seeing a steady decline in the presence and the prevalence of keystone species, right? And those are two interrelated things. So the diversity of the microbiome is based on the number of viable species that exist in your microbiome, right? And the uniformity of those species. So what you don't want is a microbiome with, say, 200 distinct species, but 20 of those species make up 90% of the population, right? And the other 180 are only like 10%. So that's still not a well diversified microbiome. What you really want is a microbiome with more than 200, 300 plus species, and there's a degree of uniformity to those organisms where no organism makes up much more than, say, 4 or 5% of the total
Right.
population. In fact, there's only a small handful of organisms that should even be at that 4 or 5% mark. Most of them should be at that 0.5% or less, right? And the reason that is important is because most of our functionality comes from our microbiome, right? So we have around 22,000 genes in our cells, and that it's not a lot from a genetic perspective, right? An earthworm has about 30,000 genes, and a cockroach has about 21,000 genes. So we're not that sophisticated in from our genetics, right? We're not a whole lot better than an earthworm is, or even better, actually. An earthworm has a higher number of genes. So then what makes us so sophisticated is the fact that we have over 2.5 million microbial genes in our system. And those microbes and their genetic capabilities give us a lot of functionality, right? So we count on this massive cohort of microbes and their genetic capabilities. We count on them for our function.
Okay.
And as we lose prevalence of some of those microbes, we lose function, right? And this is where we start to see disease and intolerance and sensitivities and all of these complexities occurring. So diversity in the microbiome is one of the most, if not the most important measure of the health of your microbiome, the health of the individual, the resilience of the individual, and is one of the best predictors of the longevity and morbidity of that individual as well. And we're
Wow.
seeing diversity declining quite steadily in the population in general, right? So I remember on the Biome Effects test when we're at Microbiome Labs, we had a diversity score that would look at the absolute number of species. And then there was an index to it based on the uniformity. On average, we were seeing around 130, 140 viable species in tests that were coming through. Now, granted, most of the people testing are people with dysfunctional guts, but it was still tens of thousands of them on a regular basis. If you compare that to like Papua New Guinea tribe or the Hadza tribe in Tanzania, which mimic what our ancestors were like, not that long ago. They've
Yeah.
got 5, 6, 700,000 different species in their guts, right?
Wow.
So we're seeing this mass extinction
Oh,
of a population of microbes that we are dependent on for functionality. The analogy I give, and it sounds crazy, but I promise you it's not hyperbolic. The analogy I give is like if I were to tell you that because of how our guts are right now, or because of our behaviors and our choices in our environment, our next generation of kids would be born without a spleen. And then the generation after that would be born without a spleen and only one kidney, right? We would be freaking out and going, what the hell are we doing that's creating this disability, if you will, in the future generations? Well, that's the same thing with the microbiome, because you have to think of the microbiome as a very complex and necessary organ. And that
right.
organ has very necessary functions. And if we're missing chunks of that organ and we're not passing it on to the next generation, they're going to be born with those functions missing from day one, right? We see it already, right? This is part of the reason why we see spectrum disorders
I was
prevalence
going to ask
increasing,
that.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
and then even looking at eczema, psoriasis,
Hmm.
and then allergies, which are all connected. Actually, there's something called atopic march. We could talk about that stems from eczema to food sensitivities to severe allergies, and the prevalence of that. I mean, asthma, which is also part of that whole cascade, is an epidemic among kids right now, right? Having asthma as a diagnosed condition early in life shortens your lifespan very dramatically because it dramatically heightens your risk for early fibrosis of the lungs, right? So then you will start to see a generation or more from now, 40-year-olds walking around with supplemental oxygen rather than 70 and 80-year-olds with supplemental oxygen, right? Because of this prevalence of asthma and early fibrosis of the lungs. And why is that happening? Well, you've got kids being born, C-section, being sterilized right
Ah,
away. Their skin microbiomes are dismantled, right? As a result of that, the skin microbiome dismantling, you get barrier dysfunction on the skin. You actually get something called leaky skin. You develop eczema and psoriasis, so these dermatitis type of conditions. That eczema and psoriasis leads to something called an atopic march, where antigens from food, from the environment, and all that enter through that part of the skin and into circulation. And when your immune system meets an antigen in the periphery, it always responds to it with a very inflammatory response because it's not supposed to be getting in the body that way. All of it is supposed to be getting in the body through the digestive tract. And the digestive tract has immune tissue that allows for something called tolerance, right? So if your gut sees a peanut protein in a normal setting, your gut and your immune system can help build tolerance against that peanut protein. If your body sees a peanut protein, if it goes to the skin, it's going to absolutely attack that with a massive inflammatory
it's
response.
not supposed to be
And
there.
it's not supposed to be there. And then every time you see a peanut protein, whether you breathe it in, you eat it, you touch it, you're going to get a massive inflammatory response, right? And it's going to go anywhere from a sensitivity all the way to an anaphylactic reaction. So that sampling of antigens through the skin is called the atopic march.
I've never
And
heard of that ever.
yeah, it's one.
That it
Here's the
goes
crazy
through the
thing.
skin.
It goes through the skin. Yeah. If you Google atopic march, you'll start to see all of this stuff that's like, holy crap, we're doomed, right? Because you see how many
Yes,
kids
it's
have
true.
dermatitis, right? So one of the things
Yeah.
I'm working on right now is on the skin microbiome. This is what Civ is. It's a skin microbiome company. And we're showing that we can absolutely reseal the barrier of the skin, reduce the penetration of antigens through the skin, and stop that atopic march. There's a very small sliver of dermatologists that are actually paying attention to this and working on this because there's no money to be made in it just yet.
Yeah.
Treating eczema is like super boring. There's no compensation for it. So very few dermatologists actually look at that. They're going for the more higher dollar items to be
Yeah.
done. And so it's this the problem is not getting the right medical attention, but the ones that are involved in it, the dermatologists that are involved in it, know how dangerous and how big of an issue this is, right? I mean, imagine our kids living in a world that they're sensitive to everything around them, right? And they're already
Yeah.
kids like that, right?
So you're gonna target it from the outside, like by putting something, changing the microbiome of the skin topically.
Yeah.
And then as well, though, is this still stemming from the gut?
It's a one-two punch, right? So,
Okay.
so the way it works is that the skin microbiome is responsible for the barrier function of the skin, right? So, how good is the skin as a barrier? Now, some of that function also comes from the gut.
Hmm.
So, I'd say it's about 80% the skin microbiome, and about 20% the gut to deal with the barrier, right? And the loss of the barrier is going to be largely dysfunction or dysbiosis on the skin. Now, how badly the immune system responds to the thing that's coming in is largely dependent on the gut, right? So if the gut is really dysfunctional and the skin barrier is really dysfunctional, you're going to get something penetrating through and you're going to get the worst immune response against it, right? If your gut is relatively healthy, but your skin barrier is compromised, then you're going to get something penetrating through, but the inflammatory response against it is going to be milder. You're going to have more of a sensitivity that you can correct rather than a massive IgE, allergic, histamine response that then
Hmm.
becomes an anaphylactic-like sensitivity, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's how they play together. In fact, we already developed this product, Civ, that it's been in the market for a couple of years now. And we've been showing skin barrier studies on eczema, acne, dermatitis, all these types of things. And it's really using the right type of transient microbes on the skin to modulate the skin microbiome. So that's what a big issue, right? So
Yeah.
if you start to look at all the things that can occur, and in fact, let me just build this aside. And I know we've somehow devolved, gone into a skin discussion, but I
That's
this
okay.
isn't.
That's okay.
This is a it's a
So
it's a
interesting to me.
it's an important point to bring up because a lot of what we'll talk about is age related, right?
Okay.
So the longest running longitudinal study on aging. This is called the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging, and anyone can look it up. Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging. You can, it's BLSA. I think it's often the acronym is BLSA. Um, it has been going on for almost 65 years. There's almost 4,000 people involved. This is the only aging study where they grab people when they're young and said, we're going to follow them all the way till they die and keep measuring stuff, right? Now, there's been over, I think, 800, 900 publications that has come out of this study already. It's one of the biggest treasure troves of understanding the human aging process and
Wow.
everything that leads to a risk of morbidity and mortality. One of the things that they've concluded from this entire study with all of those cohorts over 60 years was one of the best predictors of aging, of age-related degeneration, morbidity, and mortality was age skin. And now we would all think in our world, well, that makes sense because the skin is a reflection of an unhealthy inside, right?
Hmm.
That's how we
Hmm.
would always think of it. But that's actually not true. What they found in the study was the aging of the skin predate dysfunction on the inside. And actually, the skin aging occurs first and then accelerates dysfunction on the inside because they could find antigens and proteins from an age dysfunctional skin in areas like your bones or in your brain or in your heart, driving inflammation, right? So there are proteins from psoriatic lesions on your skin or really wrinkled and degenerated skin in parts way distal to the skin, driving inflammation in the skin. They've published papers showing how aging skin can drive osteoporosis.
What?
And one of the risk factors for Alzheimer's is aging skin, right? So
You're kidding.
it's mental when you think about it.
It
So
is
this just
mental.
it's mental. And one of the first things that occurs that drives aging of the skin is dysbiosis of the skin. That's a dismantling of the microbiome of the skin, right? So it all goes back again to the importance of the right microbial balance, not just in our gut, but turns out everywhere else in our body as well. Now, when you think about women going through perimenopause,
Mhm.
there's a number of things happening, right? Obviously, the gut is changing significantly, and we could talk about exactly what's happening there. But not only is their gut microbiome changing, but their skin microbiome is changing as well. You get an acceleration of skin aging as well, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
the combination of the two becomes a one-two punch of dramatically increasing chronic disease risk and dysfunction, right? Which is one of the reasons why women catch up to men in risk of heart disease and stroke and all that. And then, of course, accelerate way past men in the risk of, osteoporosis
Yeah.
and certain types of cancers and all that, right? Because the women's bodies are fundamentally changing from a microbial perspective, both inside and outside, right? So we have to curb that, and we have to curb that early.
So is this when you're saying like that it's the aging of the skin can tell us so much about the aging of the inside of the body? Are you saying that it's just a reflection? Like if somebody's aging really quickly, then you know, on the inside, they're also aging really quickly. Or is it a combination of that with the fact that aging skin is also a problem, like feeding into the aging process?
Yes, so that's
Did I
it's
get
more the
that
second
right?
part. Yes. So
Okay.
the
Oh.
first explanation is what we would conventionally think, that the aging skin is a reflection of an unhealthy inside. It's
Hmm.
That's not actually true. What's actually true is that aging skin is an independent risk factor for dysfunction on the inside, meaning it's driving dysfunction on the inside. And because we forget that the skin is the largest organ in the body, and its
Hmm.
primary function is to act as a barrier,
Yeah.
right? And if the skin is aging, and what do we talk about when we say aging? We're talking about fine lines, wrinkles, thinning of the skin, dryness, hyperpigmentation. Now, why would hyperpigmentation and discoloration of the skin be related to aging? Because it's a senescent activity, right? So hyperpigmentation is an example of senescence, which is
Okay.
cellular senescence. So that means the cells are going into this age-related zombie cell conformation where they're not doing their job. They're just sitting there producing pigment without any proper stimulus, and they're not turning over like they're supposed to, right? So hyperpigmentation as well, and then any sort of redness or sensitivities in the skin also, right? So those seven-ish things, and then if you add on to that eczema, psoriasis, acne, all of those are inflammatory conditions on the skin that are also an example of dysbiosis on the skin, right? So dysbiosis on the skin drives these six or seven features. Those six or seven features compromises the barrier function of the skin. Because the skin is not doing its primary job of acting as a barrier, things are now actually leaking through the skin in from your environment into the
Right.
body and encountering your immune system in a place it should not be encountering, which will
Right.
only create an inflammatory response. Many of these things in the environment that encounter your skin and penetrate through, if they went through your oral cavity and you had a relatively healthy microbiome, you would develop tolerance against them, right? That is called oral tolerance. And then if you lose that capability because of dysfunction in the gut, then we say there's a loss of oral tolerance, right? And then you become sensitive to all kinds of stuff. But if it penetrates through the skin and your immune system encounters it in the periphery, there's no sampling in the periphery. Right. And I'll explain the sampling part of it just a little bit so people understand, because I know this can all
Hmm.
sound a little bit nuanced and crazy. But I'll just give you an example of that, right? But just keep in mind, if we encounter compounds and antigens from the environment, from our food, from our textiles, and everything into the skin, and it penetrates through where the immune system is in the dermal layer, we're going to initiate an inflammatory response, and that becomes chronic low-grade inflammation throughout the body. You can, in fact, find proteins that are created in that inflammatory pathways that are found now distal from the skin in the heart, in the bones, in the joints, in the brain, and so on,
It's
right?
like leaky skin. We're having
It's
leaky
absolutely leaky
skin.
skin. I've done a talk now for a year and a half called Leaky Skin, the pathophysiology of leaky skin. Like, what is happening? How is that relating to disease states? Like, for example, kids with dermatitis, which
Yeah.
is the leakiest form of skin you can have, right? So that is that itchy, flaky lesions from which is eczema, more commonly known as eczema. That's a leakiest form that you can have of your skin. Kids with eczema lesions, you don't have to have many, right? You can have just two or three lesions on each arm, for example. It's usually in the flexor regions, which is in the folds of the skin. Those kids have 8 times higher risk of developing allergies, asthma, and food sensitivities. Eightfold, right? Not a 50%, not 100%. It's 8x higher. So that's how much dysfunction of the barrier can lead to internal pathologies that create disease states. Right. So we have to pay attention to that. So,
Hmm.
so for a perimenopausal woman or someone who's about to enter that stage, or who's in perimenopause, going into menopause, or who's firmly in menopause, all these kinds of changes are happening, right? And it's at varying stages based on where you are. Um, but all of it is ecologically driven, right? Because it's an ecological change on the skin, it's an ecological change in the gut, thereby creating all these cascades of problems. We can shift all of that at any of these stages, which is what the good news is, right?
Yes.
Given it's an ecological change, we can shift it. Even on the skin, you can shift it. Even in the gut, you can shift it. Both, you can do the same with both. Let me just give you a quick example of this sampling, because I don't want people to be super confused about how this works.
Okay.
Um, so our bodies are designed to have the skin as a very firm barrier. Now, the gut, we always talk about the gut barrier. But if you look at the comparison of the gut barrier and the skin barrier, it becomes very clear how their roles are very different, right? The skin barrier has like 100 layers of cells, right? And there's all these different types of cells. You've got these squamous cells and you've got these dermal cells. You've got multiple layers of cells, including a whole bunch of dead cells at the very top. So it acts like a really thick brick wall, right? And there's very little penetration in either direction, stuff going in or stuff coming out. And so the skin acts as a true barrier. Now, when we talk about the gut barrier, it's one cell thick, right?
Mm.
It's not a hundreds of cells thick, it's one cell thick. And those cells are sitting next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, with in between them, the space is called a tight junction, right? And that tight
Mhm.
junction is laced with 40 different proteins that can loosen up and open the space for big nutrients to go through, and then cinch up and close up when those nutrients aren't coming through. Now, to protect that one cell layer thick, we have a thick layer of mucus on top of it. Now, that mucus does a number of things. Most of the microbes live in the very top layer of the mucus, right? And there's lots of immune cells that are working in that mucus to sample what's coming through. So that mucus not only acts as a barrier to slow down things, but it also slows down the rate of things approaching that single cell. So there's enough time for your immune system to figure out what that thing is, for your cells, your epithelial cells to figure out what that thing is, and to get all the signals to open or close or stay shut and so on, right? Now, why the sampling works through the gut and not through the skin? Because this whole system is designed to learn what your environment is like, right? Things are that you encounter, let's say things in the air, right? We'll
Mhm.
take an example of that. Let's say you walk through a garden, right? There's all this pollen and all this stuff floating around, right? That stuff is supposed to come and sit on the dead cells of your skin, the stratum corneum, and then just slough off when the skin sloughs off, right? Which is probably later on that day. So it's supposed to hit a brick wall and sit there and then blow off. It's not supposed to go in, right? Where it
Mhm.
does go in is in your respiratory tract because we're breathing it in, right? But what happens when it goes in the respiratory tract? You breathe it in, and then the mucus in your respiratory tract traps it, the pollen. Now you have something in your respiratory tract called a mucociliary elevator, all these beautiful little hairs that take that mucus that has trapped that pollen and moves it up wherever it is in your respiratory tract, and then eventually dumps it into the back of your throat and you swallow it. So now you're swallowing this globule of mucus that has secretory IgA, right?
Mhm.
This immunoglobulin that we make all the time in our mucus tissue that has bound and neutralized that pollen and is taking that pollen down to the lining of your gut. Now, 75% of your immune tissue is sitting in the lining of your gut. That's where all this sampling occurs. So here's how the sampling occurs. You've got the gut cells sitting together. You've got a dendritic cell, which is a very specialized type of immune cell that has these dendrites. This is why they're called the dendritic cells. They can reach in between the tight junctions of the cells, reach all the way in the mucosa, and start sampling that mucus that's coming through and the pollen that's in there,
It's
right?
literally taking a sample.
It's literally taking, like, it's touching it and going, what the hell is that thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, it samples it. Now, let's say it samples it in the context of a healthy microbiome. The healthy microbiome is producing short chain fatty acids, so butyrate, and it's producing signals of tolerance for that sampling. So what that tells the dendritic cell is this thing I'm touching is not a thing to be cautious about. So I'm going to activate a T cell called a regulatory T cell and inform that T cell that anytime you see this thing, if the immune system reacts to it, you suppress that response, right? We
Mm.
don't need to be attacking this thing. So this is how you build immune tolerance. That regulatory T cell learns from the dendritic cell. The dendritic cell learns from the microbiome what is dangerous and what's not dangerous, right? Now, let's say the microbiome is all haphazard during the sampling of the pollen, right? And so you've got you've got low short chain fatty acids, low butyrate, propionate, and acetate. You've got inflammation in the
In the
mucosa
gut.
as a
Yeah.
result of that, right? When the dendritic cell samples the pollen in the context of inflammation, it goes, oh shit, it must be another thing we have to attack. So instead of activating the regulatory T cell, it gets these helper T cells to activate B cells to make antibodies against it and go attack this thing, right? So that is the context difference in sampling. So there's an intelligence in the lining of the gut that helps us build tolerance against the things we need to tolerate or intolerance against the things we shouldn't tolerate. But all of that is dependent on a healthy microbiome. But none of that happens when things go through the skin. It's always going to get attacked by the macrophages and other
Right.
cells, right? So that's where sampling differs. And in a perimenopausal woman, right? What one of the things that occurs, one of the definitive changes that occurs in the gut is you get this reduction in diversity in the gut microbiome, right? The gut microbiome diversity shrinks because of lower estrogen, right? So estrogen actually plays a very important role in feeding microbes, right? As estrogen drops, you start to see a lowering of lactobacilli. You start to see a reduction in bifidobacteria. You start to see a reduction in Faecalibacteria, Akkermansia. These are keystone species, right? And you start to see an increase in inflammatory microbes like Enterobacter, right? So you start to see the shift where there's more inflammation in that context of sampling than there was before. Now, the other thing that estrogen does is it helps maintain the barrier function in the lining of the gut. So as the estrogen drops and the microbiome is changing, the gut also becomes more leaky. When the gut becomes leaky, those tight junctions I'm talking about, they start to dismantle and open up for too long. Or that mucus layer starts to thin too much. And things can start to penetrate through that shouldn't be penetrating through that would normally be stopped. Right. So all of that then causes this cascade of inflammation in the lining of the gut. And then some of that inflammation makes its way into circulation and creates chronic low-grade inflammation through the body as well. Right. So hopefully all that. That was a lot of stuff.
Oh,
So,
I'm soaking it in. I'm soaking it all in. Do we know the mechanism of action of how it's estradiol, I'm assuming, not
mhm.
estriol or estrone. How does it help with the integrity of the gut?
Yeah. So as it turns out, there are estrogen receptors
Okay.
on the epithelial cells itself, right? So
Okay.
one of the reasons is because there is this estrogen is cleared through the gut. We know that, right? So we know
Yes.
that that is a really important relationship. That there has to be a recognition in the gut of estrogen because it has to make it into portal circulation and end up in the liver. And so there are estrogen receptors on the enterocytes that make
Okay.
up the lining of the gut. And as a result of binding the estrogen, in fact, it can upregulate the expression of those tight junction proteins.
Okay.
So that is the relationship there. Now, as estrogen declines, you see less of that binding, less of the upregulation of tight junction proteins, and that seems to be one of the important regulatory components. Now, estrogen's role in helping with the diversity of the microbiome is also really interesting. And it's a mix of estrogen being directly metabolized by microbes in the gut
Hmm.
through glucuronidase, beta glucuronidase, and then some of those metabolites also feeding the microbiome, right?
Okay.
So that and then there's another component to it. There's evidence that estrogen itself and the binding of estrogen receptors in the gut lining increases the production of short chain fatty acids. And an increase in the production of short chain fatty acids modulates inflammation in the gut, which then supports the growth of the beneficial commensals. So if you think about inflammation in the gut favors pathogens, and reduced inflammation favors the growth of commensals, right? So that shift alone helps and supports diversity in a positive way.
And then I would think too, the effects of estradiol on the immune system, as well as as just in general inflammation in the whole body,
Hmm.
as we know that as estradiol drops, inflammation goes up
Yep.
and the immune system can go down as far as how sensitive we are to getting sick. And so it's like,
Yeah.
and then that I would think it's like a two-way street of, okay, now that is also because your immune system's kind of going down, it's faltered, and we're getting more systemic inflammation, which would then also drive gut inflammation and just make things worse, putting fuel on this fire that's happening.
Yeah. And there's a couple of very specific things that occur there. So um, So one of the things, it starts with an increase in permeability in the lining of the intestines
Okay.
as estrogen declines, right? So you're starting to see that estradiol reduction, start to see intestinal permeability goes up. There are two things that occurs as a result of that going up that has a profound effect on how the immune system responds to everything. The first thing that occurs is LPS, lipopolysaccharides, which are this components of gram-negative bacteria that are released into the mucous lining because there's lots of gram-negative bacteria in your microbiome, and this is a component of their cell membrane. So when the gram-negative bacteria die, and bacteria are constantly dying in the gut, and then the parts are being sent out, they release this LPS. This LPS is an endotoxin, right? So it has a potent inflammatory response in the body if it makes it in the body, right? In a highly permeable gut, that LPS is allowed to leak through and enter into circulation. It does a
Okay.
few things. 85% of the LPS that leaks through in a gut with declining estrogen levels goes to the liver. The liver is responsible for dealing with it first, right? So what starts to happen is the liver has to produce something called LBP, LPS binding protein, and something called HDL3. So HDL is like that good cholesterol, right? The high density lipoproteins, but it makes a unique version of it called HDL3 that has to bind to the LPS, take it to the Kupffer cells, which are the detox cells on the liver, for enzymatic digestion and getting rid of it, right? So now, as estrogen declines, permeability is increasing,
Mm-hmm.
LPS is leaking more, the liver
Mm-hmm.
is actually becoming more toxic because it's undergoing a higher load of stress on a day-to-day basis because it's dealing with all of this LPS that's coming through. As a result of that, not only is the liver getting fatty, right? It's also screwing up metabolism because the liver is largely responsible for T4 to T3 conversion. The liver is responsible for managing energy in the brain, right? The brain, when the brain needs glucose, which is its primary energy fuel, it calls on the liver for that. So the liver is not responding. You're going to get brain fog and slowingness of memory and brain function and all that. You're going to feel more lethargic, more tired. And on top of that, as bile starts to reduce, because now the liver is undergoing toxicity, it's not producing as much bile. You're getting less bile into the system. You're not absorbing your fat soluble vitamins as well. So you're
Mm-hmm.
getting vitamin A, D, K, and E deficient. That impacts your bones, your skin, your brain, everything else, right? And on top of that, bile is not being converted to secondary bile salts like UDC, which is really important for insulin response. So you're becoming more insulin resistant. And all of that is leading to weight gain as well, right? And then some of that LPS, as the liver can't handle the load, is leaking into the rest of the circulation. Now, in the rest of the circulation, LPS wreaks havoc in the body, right? Wherever it goes, it upregulates a massive inflammatory response. If it makes its way up the vagus nerve or up circulation to the brain, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It interferes with dopamine and serotonin receptor binding. So it increases anxiety and depression dramatically. In fact, there was a 9-year-long study called the Netherlands Study on Anxiety and Depression. They
Mm-hmm.
were following thousands of people to look at which biomarkers were the most predictive of developing anxiety and depression. And they found only one biomarker was 99.98% predictive, and that was how much LPS you had in circulation. And how much LPS you had in circulation would also dictate how severe your anxiety and depression is. So this is another reason
Wow.
why anxiety and depression goes up when you hit your perimenopausal menopausal state. On top of that, because of all this inflammation, the immune system is running amok. It's attacking all the things it shouldn't attack. It's missing the things it should attack. If there's a new virus that comes in, it can't see it because there's fires all over the body, right? Because anytime a new virus and all that comes in, the local cells in that area shoots off inflammatory flares to try to attract the immune system, right? It's like a fire alarm to fire people to firemen. And so if there's fire alarms going off all over the body, the immune system's distracted, they won't see that fire alarm for a while, right? So you become more susceptible. The second reason why, so that's the first reason why immune dysregulation occurs. But then I threw in metabolic and brain and all of the stuff too, right? So sorry, I couldn't help it. But the second reason why is anytime your gut cells become more permeable, the cells that respond to that permeability are mast cells, right?
Mm.
So your gut lining sits like this. On top of it is the mucosa. Up here is the tube, right? Which is where all the food and all that passes through. The last line of defense on the underside of your gut cells are mast cells, right? They're
Hmm.
always kind of floating around. And the reason they're there is because this single cell layer is very vulnerable to something called sepsis, right? Because you can imagine it's just one cell thick. If there's like a crazy egregious bacteria that overgrows over here, busts through the mucus layer, it can easily bust through this single cell layer, and
Hmm.
so much of it will enter the bloodstream, and you'd become septic, and then you could die in 48 hours, right?
Yeah.
So the body takes that potential barrier compromise very seriously. So it keeps mast cells, which are very powerful immune cells, right, in the alert down here. Now, at the bottom of the intestinal epithelial cells are little receptors that the mast cell reads to understand what's happening with the tight junction proteins, right? This is the way the mast cells can understand, is this cell here, these two cells sitting next to each other, are they at risk of becoming leaky, right? So as they become leakier, the mast cell goes, binds these receptors and becomes activated. And then when anything comes through, it degranulates, it releases all of this histamine, leukotriene, all of these things that recruits a whole bunch of other immune cells to that area and creates massive havoc of inflammation. That same inflammation can also get translated throughout the rest of the body, where the mast cells are now going after everything that your body
Yes.
encounters, right? So now you start getting that mast cell activation or histamine
Yes.
intolerance as well,
Yeah.
right? So that's where it all stems from. All of this stems from the simple changes in the gut microbiome. You get all that liver dysfunction I talked about, all that increased brain anxiety, all that metabolic changes in insulin resistance, all of the mast cell activation and immune compromise. Right? It's
Yeah.
complicated, it's
Oh,
profound, but it's also very simple in a way because it all starts with reduction of diversity in the gut
okay.
microbiome.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say that it's starting basically now when we're born,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? Like kids are coming into this world with their mother's microbiome and just already coming in so super deficient.
Yeah.
I interviewed Dr. I can't remember her first name, McBride, the one that developed the GAPS protocol.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, brilliant woman, brilliant Russian doctor of nutrition or something along those lines. It was super long. It was probably like 7 years ago that I interviewed her. But I'll never forget her talking about. So she developed the GAPS protocol. If you guys don't know what that is, it's a protocol that was developed to actually help with kids that had autism or on the
Hmm.
spectrum somewhere. And I'll never forget her saying, you know, she doesn't believe that vaccines cause autism. And she
Hmm.
said, what I think is happening is kids are being born already compromised. Their gut
Hmm.
microbiome is already compromised. Then we are filling them full of these vaccinations within the first 3 months. Or sometimes in the United States, it's right when they're born, they're being
Right.
vaccinated. And she said it's like the last straw. It's the thing that kind of breaks the system because
Yeah.
it's making it that microbiome that much worse, which is then going up to the brain and causing brain inflammation. I can't remember exactly how she put it, but basically that was kind of she really believed that so much of this was being caused by the microbiome, and then
Hmm.
that the onslaught of what we were doing to it when these kids were born already compromised,
Yep.
and then these things they'd be more, they're now being more prone to developing, you know, uh, autism
Absolutely. It's
and
it's
things like that.
exactly
Yeah,
the
would you
same
agree?
as.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I would not say that vaccines cause autism at all. I would
yeah.
say that in some kids, the vaccine could be the straw that broke the camel's back. It's
That's
no
it. Yeah.
different than if you let your muscles atrophy to a point where you become weak, walking down the stairs could cause you to fall and break your hip and all that because, because your muscles are weak. You can't support your body. You can't support the impact of going down the steps again and with gravity pulling you down. So it's not, we then can't say that stairs cause hip, fractures,
Exactly.
right? It's the compromised system undergoing that stressor, and the stressor
Hmm.
breaks it.
Yeah.
And so yes, absolutely true. Like by that same rationale, so then there's like probably a portion of kids where a vaccine has been the trigger that
Hmm.
cause dysfunction. But what about all the other kids? What are the other things that are causing triggers, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't even have to be as profound and aggressive as multivariant vaccines, right?
Hmm.
It could
Hmm.
be certain foods. It could be, in fact, there's
Hmm.
some data around gestational stress that can
Yes.
lead to it, or gestational obesity, which increases inflammation. And so it could be inflammation, right?
Hmm.
In fact, here's another, and I'll just, this is another aside, but hopefully this information is interesting for people. This goes back to, and this is directly related to the autism comment you made, because it speaks to the intimacy of our connection with microbes, how much we have outsourced functionality to them, right? So there are certain types of microbes that live in your gut that are really important commensals, especially the genre of bifidobacteria. Many of these specialized types of bifidobacteria, and they're not all bifidos, they're very special bifs that have certain types of unique carbohydrates on their outer cell membranes, right? And these carbohydrates can be classified as peptidoglycans or extracellular matrix. There's a number of different, or extracellular polysaccharides. So there's different ways of describing it. They have such important functions. So one of them was one that I worked with for a number of years called Bifidobacterium longum 1714, where the extracellular matrix or polysaccharide of this bacteria gets eaten up by dendritic cells, right? So remember those cells that reach across and sample things. When this cell reaches across and it sees this bacteria, it actually grabs it and pulls it across the lining of the gut, right? And then it takes it into circulation. It digests the bacteria and releases the carbohydrates from the cell membrane of the bacteria into circulation. That those carbohydrates go into the central nervous system and bind receptors that bring down cortisol expression and shift brainwave activity to low frequency brainwave as if you're meditating, right?
Mm.
And it can increase or reduce HPA activation. So it's an anti-anxiety, antidepressant microbe, right? Now, the same type of carbohydrate, when mom is pregnant,
Hmm.
there are receptors on the placenta that are sitting there waiting to bind bacterial carbohydrates, right? So mom's immune cells, dendritic cells, will reach across the lining of the gut, grab these type of bacteria, bring it to the placenta, digest it, and release the carbohydrates. Then there are receptors that grab the carbohydrates. Then there are transporters that transport those carbohydrates all the way to the baby's brain, and the baby's brain
Wow.
has receptors to bind the carbohydrates. And guess what that does when they bind the carbohydrates? It increases the formation of the blood-brain barrier. It increases the formation of the corpus callosum, that space, that connector that connects the left and right brain. It increases myelination, which is the insulation you need on all your nerve cells. It increases synaptogenesis, which is the development of the synapses. So baby's brain development, we have outsourced in part to gut bacteria, right? Which
Wow.
is crazy
That's
if you think about it,
crazy.
right? Like, probably arguably one of the most important things you want to happen to the human brain in utero,
Yes.
right? Is the
Yes.
development of it. We've gone, we don't have the capability to do it. Let's use bacteria to turn that on, right? That's how intimate the connection is. And so if mom has less adequate amounts of those types of bacteria, we're
Right.
missing some of those signals. And there's evidence that then there's an underdevelopment of the brain as a result of that,
Wow.
right?
Wow. That is crazy. Oh man, we are just screwed, aren't we? In so many ways. It's very overwhelming because how it all works together and synergistically and back and forth. And it's like,
Mhm.
where do we even begin? But
The
it has
solutions
to,
can be simple, which is
okay,
good,
okay,
right?
okay.
So,
Yeah.
so I know with all of this information, it becomes very, very overwhelming. But I would encourage people to just focus on a small handful of things, and that small handful of things cumulatively. I have a
Yeah.
hard time saying that word. That cumulatively, right? I think that's a word. It has a massive impact on your ecosystem, on your terrain, and thereby alleviates and helps with all of these complications that we talked about, right? So you don't have to think about how all of it's connected and all that stuff because that is overwhelming. And that's about my job, right? That's my job
Hmm.
to understand these things. It's a one talent I have. I can't do anything else well, but I can understand this stuff, right? And I can explain it in a way that's relevant to people. And so that's my job to understand that and then boil it down to the most important things. Okay, so here's the most important things. Number one, you have to work on constantly on yourself, on your children, on everybody you care about. You have to work on their diversity in the gut
Okay.
microbiome. And we'll talk about how you do each of these. You have to increase the prevalence of keystone species, right? These are called keystone because they're so important to the structure and the function of the microbiome. And they also protect against disease, quite specifically, right? Number three, you have to be mindful of the mucus layer of the gut, so the barrier function of the gut. We have to keep that in mind. And you might be thinking right now, like, how the hell do I keep that in mind? I'll explain in a very simplistic way. And number four, we need the right type of exposure and reduce the wrong type of exposure, right? So we just think about those things. Okay, four things to think about. And this is true if you're 19 years old listening to this, if you're 30 and you just got freaked out about what may happen in perimenopause, several years down the road, or if you're in perimenopause and you go, holy shit, I'm dealing with all these things that he just talked about, or if you're menopausal or postmenopausal, you still can fix all this stuff, right? And you
Hmm.
can still make everything better and improve quality of life and functionality. It's never too late. If you're 98 years old and you just tuned in for the first time today and you're just hearing about the microbiome for the first time, you could still repair and fix all of it and improve things. Okay, so here's a simplistic thing. Diversity. Um, the most effective way to improve diversity of the gut microbiome is to improve the diversity of your diet, right? Increasing the diversity of the things you eat. So, plant-based foods, lean meats, nuts, fruits, tubers, seeds, all of that stuff, right? So we are omnivores. I know diet becomes tribalistic and people go mental over their diets, right? And they name themselves based on their diet, like I am carnivore Mike and I'm, vegan Tim, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's nuts to
Totally.
me that people are their whole identity is their choice of eating.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so let's lay all of the controversy of diet aside. Let's just purely look at biology and let's look at research. The most well-studied diet in the world that bar none has more data on it than anything else is the Mediterranean style diet, right? And the reason to me, and there's variations of it, right? So it doesn't have to be super specific. What's really the best about it is a high diversity of foods, right? And then a high amount of fiber in some of those foods as well. So fiber could be singularly the one of the most important things that you put into your system. And I know fiber is not sexy, right? It doesn't sound that exciting for people, but it's one of the most well-studied macronutrients. The 2019 publication, it's a meta-analysis study. They looked at, if I'm not mistaken, about 183 published studies on this, right? I think it was 30 million person years worth of data on this, right? Massive amounts. They showed for every 10 grams of fiber you add to your daily diet, you reduce your all-cause mortality. That's dying from anything by 10%. And that's up to about 40 grams of fiber. And for cardiovascular disease, it goes all the way up to 50 grams of fiber and 50% reduction. And after that 40, 50%, the line kind of flattens out a little bit. So there's still benefit, but the benefit is not so linear, right? So if you're not getting 40 to 50 grams of fiber into your daily diet, you're missing out on cutting down your risk of dying from anything by almost 40 to 50%, right? Which is such a
It's
tremendous
crazy.
waste.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's so simple, right?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
simple. And the best way for me for to do it is to think about adding somewhere around 8 to 10 grams of fiber pre your two largest meals of the day, right? I do that in a supplemental way because it's easier. I just do psyllium husk or partially hydrolyzed guar gum or acacia fiber or whatever, or a combination of them. I do about 8 to 10 grams through a few tablespoons, mix it in a glass, drink it down before the meal. Why before the meal? Well, not only are you getting your fiber, you're slowing down gastric emptying, you're slowing down the bowel movements, exactly what GLP-1 agonists do,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
your natural Ozempic, which will make you eat less in that meal.
Yeah.
It'll reduce the postprandial glucose response. It'll increase the postprandial fat burn. And on top of that, it also feeds the gut microbiome, right? So it's one of the easiest and best ways to consume fiber. Do it before the meals. So if your meal itself has around 10 grams of fiber, and then you're taking about 8 to 10 grams as a supplement, that means with each meal, you're getting almost 20 grams of fiber. And then that's 2 meals a day, 40 grams of fiber, boom, you're done. You've
What
cut, yeah.
what
What
does it
kind of fiber?
mean? No, what does it mean when all those things, the acacia, the psyllium husks, if they just kill your stomach? Like if I have
Yes.
even a little bit, I am like keeled over
Yeah.
cramping. Does that mean my gut diversity is really bad?
Yes, so it means that
Yes.
yes, unfortunately, it means yes. A resounding yes.
Yeah.
However, that said, it doesn't have to be. You can absolutely work through that, right? So here's how you would work through it. And you're not alone. I mean, it's very,
I
very
can do
common that,
vegetables. No
well, which is
problem.
great. So
All
so this is where
vegetables.
the
Yeah.
cooking process makes it more gentle, right? Um, so here's what I would say now, and I would never recommend anyone go from the standard American diet of 8 to 12 grams of fiber per day to 40 grams tomorrow. You will hate me and you'll be farting all over the place and it wouldn't be a pretty thing, right? So when I say get your target of 40 to 50 grams a day, that means incrementally get there. And the way I recommend incrementally getting there is adding about 3 to 5 grams to your daily intake for like a week. So stick with that additional 3 to 5 grams, and then the next week add another 3 to 5 grams. Let's say your standard American diet, you're getting 10 grams a day right now, just incidentally from stuff you eat. So add 3 grams as a supplemental fiber, break it up between 2 or 3 doses, right? Do that for a week. And then next week, make that 3 to 6 grams each time, and so on. So go
Yeah.
incremental, go slow. Now, what if people are like you, which a lot of people are like you, they cannot handle a lot of that supplemental fiber because that stuff is just pure fiber going in, and your gut is supposed to do something called saccharolytic fermentation to break it down in a favorable way. Often your microbiome isn't designed for that yet, but it will get there, right? So it produces gas and all that instead. So in that case, what you want to do is actually use partially hydrolyzed guar gum PHGG is one of the most gentlest fibers you could take, right? Now, I would use tiny amounts of that. So you can go as little as 500 milligrams, sprinkle it on your food or add it into your water while you're consuming your food, where you're getting your cooked vegetables and all that. And then also do resistant starch. Most people do quite well with resistant starch. Well, how do you get that? Well, you can buy resistant starch. Like, Bob's Red Mill has like potato resistant starch in a
Yeah. That
powder.
killed me. It
Yeah,
killed
it
me.
did. Okay, so that
Yeah.
might be too much for you in that context. But what you could do is actually make it yourself through potato, right? So
Okay.
take a potato, cook it, and then cool it. And then after the cooling process in the fridge actually increases the bonds
That's
in the
right.
carbohydrates in the potato, and that makes it more resistant. Then eat it that way. So, or same thing you can do with rice as well to
Yeah.
increase the resistance to starch, but it's not as dramatic as just taking straight powder resistant starch, right? But you would have to do that consistently.
Hmm.
Now, I would do that and make sure you take your spore probiotics with each of those meals, right? Like the megaspore, for example, or just thrive probiotic, because the spores actually will facilitate the digestion of the starch or the carbohydrates, right? So do that slowly, incrementally. It doesn't matter if it takes you 6 months to get to the next level, just do it incrementally. It's still beneficial. You're still moving the system in the right direction, right? And I find that most of the time the reaction is if they try something and you get that bad response, then you just stop it, right? Because nobody wants that bad response. So
Mhm.
instead, I would go much more gentler, much slower, and just keep working at it. You will
Mhm.
absolutely get there, right?
Okay.
Within 8 months, you might be 50 gram a day girl, just drinking psyllium husk, no problem, and just vibrant everywhere, right? As even,
And
even
not
more than you
farting.
already are. And zero farts. Yes. You'll still have friends. You could still travel on airplanes without causing a big havoc. So yeah, that's so fiber. Fiber and diversity in your diet are the two key things to increasing diversity in your food, in your gut, right?
Yeah.
There's another aspect of increasing diversity, and that is managing stress. So stress reduces diversity quite a bit, right? So anything you can do to manage stress and work on your neurological system. If you are way, sympathetic and you've got HPA activation all day long and all that, get one of those vagus nerve stimulators.
Oh, I've been
There's
looking
like,
at those. It's Black Friday right now, and all
yep,
week I've been looking at the Pulsetto and then the other ones. And
yeah, the True Vega and all of them, right?
yeah, I
Yeah,
know it's really hard because there's not a lot to back some of them up. Like they don't have studies.
yeah.
And then I've heard that they don't actually, that it's impossible for them to actually activate the vagus nerve with some of these things, but yet it still seems to work for some
Yep.
people.
It can, but it has to be in combination with other things. On its own, I don't think it's going to move the needle significantly, but
Hmm.
as an add-on to other things that you're doing, I think it can be profound.
Yeah,
And I've seen it
yeah.
myself, and I've tried them myself. A good friend of mine, Dr. Nawaz Habib,
Oh,
he's
I was just
done.
gonna say I've got a guy coming on this week. Him,
Oh, awesome!
Navas.
Yes,
I have
he
him coming
knows
on.
everything you need to know about the vagus nerve.
Okay.
And he really supports one version. I think it's True Vega, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
But I would but do that.
Okay.
That's a one way. But the other really simplistic way is to also add is the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is just deep diaphragmatic breathing, right? That's where
Mm.
cortisol is high, which is what you want. Obviously, you need
Hmm.
that awakening response, but then you need to start calming the system down so you don't go into a full-on kind of spiraling of stress and anxiety, right? What most people do when they wake up and cortisol's high, they pick up their phone and they start looking at messages and this and that, and then
Hmm.
that stresses them out even more, and they're engaging with those stressors in a high stress, in a potentially high stress state to begin with. So that's not a good thing. So you want to wake up, do some deep diaphragmatic breathing, and then actually this practice is really interesting because there's data behind it. Waking up and then on your way to the bathroom to brush your teeth and all that, hum and kind of hum a tune, your favorite tunes, right? Humming actually has quite an impact on activating the vagus nerve, right?
Hmm.
And then hum your way to the sink, and you get to the sink and you put a bunch of water in your mouth and you gargle. That has activation of the vagus nerve as well. So try to stay away from stimulus like texting or notifications and things like that on the phone that may cause you to go down a stress path. Instead, do some breathing, do some humming, do some gargling, maybe do the True Vega for 5, 10 minutes or whatever the need is, and then go about your day. And there's lots of things you can do for stress management, but that's one of them. So do stress management. The fourth thing that actually helps diversity is resistance training.
Oh,
So this is an angle that most people aren't aware of.
no.
When you lift weights, right? When your muscles contract, they release a whole set of chemicals called myokines. These myokines are super interesting. They're like a pharmacy of repair and calmness for the rest of your body, right? So they can increase endorphins in the brain and bring down cortisol, which is another way of managing stress, right? And then some of those myokines actually go into the gut and start to seal up holes in the gut and increase diversity in the gut microbiome, right? They can modulate immune response.
Hmm.
So if you're somebody that's really stressed in the morning, right? If you get up and you're panicky and that's just your normal state, One of the things you could do, and it doesn't mean you have to be at the gym for 45 minutes to get this, right? Have a kettlebell somewhere near your bed. When you wake up in the morning, do some deep breathing and all that. Get up and maybe do 4 or 5 kettlebell swings, right? Or do some
That could be a little aggressive, Kiran.
it could be, right? But it
I
could
like
also
my
help with
mornings to be
movement and
very quiet.
motility. But if you're somebody, well, yeah, if you're already calm, then this is
Yeah.
fine, right? But if you're somebody that tends to be very stressed in the morning, getting some sort of contraction of your muscles against
Right.
a weight, and again, it doesn't have to be a full routine, just some, will have a
That's
counteracting
amazing.
effect on the stress and is really good for your gut, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Take
That's amazing.
prebiotics and probiotics and all of that as well.
Yeah.
Now, keystone species love fiber, so you want to take that. They love prebiotics, they love resistant starches, and they love polyphenols.
Right.
Polyphenols are one of the most important things for your gut as well. So if you're getting those dietary changes, you're taking the polyphenols, you're managing your stress, you're going to increase diversity, increase keystone species. Take the spore-based probiotics, you're going to be sealing up the lining of the gut. You're going to be have less LPS tracking through, and then exposure I talked about, right? So
Hmm.
what I mean by exposure is you want to reduce your exposure to things that will harm your microbiome. Of course, bad foods, right? So highly processed foods with pesticides, herbicides, antimicrobials, and all that. That's very sensible. I think most people understand that. Personal care products
Yeah. What
that
you were
harm
putting
your
on our
microbiome, what
skin
you're putting on our skin matters so
because
much,
our
right?
skin is
We
leaking.
never think about that, right? And so
Yeah.
you want to try to clean up your personal care products as much as you
Hmm.
can. I started, for example, with lotion. I said, what's the cleanest lotion I can find that works on my skin? I ended up finding one that works well. And then I went to deodorant. What's the cleanest deodorant I can find that
Yeah.
works well for my skin? Toothpaste, all of that. Do it one by one so you're not overwhelmed. You don't have to throw on everything in your medicine cabinet and start from scratch, right? And then outdoor exposure. So, exposure to natural microbes in the outdoors is profoundly impactful for your gut and your overall health. So, going for a walk in a natural environment, if you have the luxury of having forest preserves or a beach or some sort of natural environment around you, use it as much as you can, right? 30 minutes, 3 times a week minimum in that natural environment. If you can, be cognizant of touching things, right? So you see kids are super curious when they go on hikes and walks. They're picking up sticks and rocks and grabbing at leaves and feeling textures. It's a very innate thing for humans to do these things. So do that, right? Go back to
Hmm.
that because you're picking up microbes from these environments. Then don't put hand sanitizer on your hands.
No.
Sit down and eat an apple or eat something in that natural environment. It's one of the most natural ways to encounter nature, and that has a profound effect on your gut as well. So a
Yeah.
few things there. There's more things you can do,
I always
but
tell
those
my
are
son,
things.
because my son's a bit of a germaphobe, and he'll be like, Mom, the kids are sick at school, and so kind of coughed, and then I touched this, and then I'm like, no, that's really good. Like, you
Yep.
don't want to go and smother yourself in hand sanitizer and wash your hand. I'm like, the more you're exposed to that, the stronger your immune system's going to be and the less sick you're going to be. It's opposite
Hmm.
of what people are teaching their children in most cases, right?
Right.
It's like expose them to as much diversity as they can get their hands on.
Yep. Especially if you're building their gut at the same time, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you want their immune system to encounter these things when it's in a healthy state. It'll absolutely build tolerance to it. This is why certain categories of people had a really rough time with COVID, and many healthy people had no issue with it at all. Here was the
Hmm.
big distinction factor, right? So, a massive study on this was done at University College Cork by Professor Liam Mahoney. And what they were able to do is actually, at the end of this study, they were able to just take stool samples of individuals, right? And then predict just from the stool sample, not knowing anything else about the individual, whether this person ended up in the hospital with COVID or long haulers or was perfectly fine, was exposed to it, and maybe had cold-like symptoms and were fine. It was all about the level of pathobionts to commensals, right? So how healthy your gut microbiome was the determining factor of how your body responded to this new agent that came
Wow.
into the system, right? So
Yeah,
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 absolutely.
yeah.
Exposure to things is fine. especially if you're working on your gut and your gut's relatively
And I'm
healthy.
going to add another thing there to my listeners, and they're going to be so surprised when I say this. Possibly we should be replacing our hormones, I think.
Yeah, right. Wow,
Because
it turns
really,
out that's not a terrible thing to do.
because if it's going both ways, right, that the gut's going to be affecting the hormones, but the hormones affect the gut integrity. If we
Yep.
can keep these hormones up, not only will it help with our gut, it helps with the immune system. And we know that as we lose these hormones, collagen loss happens, which is part of the
Hmm.
thinning of the face
Hmm.
and the integrity of the face microbiome or the skin microbiome starts to
Yep.
become impacted. So if we can keep our levels of hormones up, I would think that this would have dramatic effect on so many of these things that we talked about today.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about our system, right, our system evolved in the context of people meeting the end of their life in their 40s.
Yeah,
Right?
right,
We
right.
we it was only, if I'm not mistaken, and somebody will have to fact check me on this because I don't remember the exact date, but it was less than 100-ish years ago that humans were predominantly living in on average into their 40s and 50s, right? And a lot of people were succumbing to things that would catch them in their 40s and 50s. And now, because of lots of ways of managing certain disease conditions and states and early detection and all of that technology, we're living into our 80s and 90s, right?
Hmm.
So our systems haven't yet evolved to propagate those amazing years of adequate hormone production and mitochondrial function and all of that stuff for many decades, right? A lot of that starts to decline in your 30s.
Yeah,
Because when you hit your 30s, normally you were past your 50% of your lifespan. And so we have to be conscious of maintaining some of these critical compounds and functions in our system, and sometimes artificially, because we're living into our 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? So
yeah,
so
yeah.
I think, yeah, and I think I'm sure many people who've been on your channel have said this. One of the biggest disasters has been the framing of hormone replacement therapy, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
such a shame,
And a lot of
you
people will
know?
say, well, it's not natural for us to have hormones in the second half of our life. And I always go back to that, which is,
Mhm.
yeah, but we've never lived this long. So
Yeah.
we're running into many different problems with living this long. And we're doing all that we can. We've got medicine coming in to help us live longer. We've got supplements, we've got lifestyle. And so we're trying to pull all these pieces together that can
Mhm.
help us live like a great life in the second half of our life. And hormones are it's like the number one in my eyes. It's massive that we
Yeah.
have to look at. And because we can be doing all of these great things, right? Eating well and exercising, but we can still have the symptoms because the hormones are such a big piece.
Right. Yep.
Like those things we're not going to cure that 100% because the foundational thing that could be driving it is missing.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you
So yeah,
think,
I mean, and I would encourage women, and I'm not a
yeah,
hormone expert by any means, but I would absolutely encourage women. But I do have a wife in perimenopause, so I am an expert to some degree in this.
yes,
I have lived experience, right?
yeah, yeah,
From a observer perspective. That if the best way to is like women should start looking into this in their mid to early 30s. You
yeah,
should
thank
be
you.
understanding where you are with your production.
Yes,
And then like a Dutch test will tell you what that's being metabolized into, which forms of estrogen and all that stuff, right? And then getting a real handle on it early on, and then supplementing,
I agree.
mitigating the drastic changes,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Because it
100%.
doesn't
I
it
talk about
doesn't
that a
have to be
lot.
like that anymore, right? It's no different than like, hey, we have early ways of detecting atherosclerosis now. We have early ways of detecting cancer. We have early ways of detecting and managing all these other dysfunctions. Why would we not do it with hormones, right?
Yeah.
It's nonsensical to me.
Just quickly, if you have time, we talk so much about estrogen being metabolized through the gut. We need their estrobolome. And you talked
Hmm.
all about how estrogen really helps with our gut integrity. What about progesterone and testosterone? Are these
Hmm.
also, do they have bacteria that they need to have that we need to have in place in order to metabolize them in the gut as well? Because we always talk about estrogen, and I'm like, I don't
Right.
really know if there's, do we have to metabolize progesterone and testosterone through the gut?
Progesterone only a little bit,
Okay.
and there's less information on that, but androgens, yes. So there
Okay.
are species like Bifidobacterium adolescentes, which is actually in many ways considered a keystone species. Akkermansia muciniphila, which is a keystone species. Clostridia, I think it's like cluster 8 or something, which all of those influence SHBG levels, right? Which then, of course, affects the free testosterone versus
Yeah.
utilization of testosterone. It also those also affect the conversion of testosterone to DHT, and then it also impacts adrenal androgen tone, so via HPA activation. Now, at the end of the day, the other thing that actually is a master controller of androgen or testosterone production in men, at least, this obviously it may not be the same in women, is this issue of LPS, right? We mentioned
Hmm.
LPS, leaky gut. So leaky gut activates this process called the gelding process, Gelding. That is, and it stands for gut endotoxin lipopolysaccharide. It basically reduces the production of testosterone when you have high levels of endotoxins, right? Here's why it does that. When you have high levels of endotoxin in your circulation, it signals to your body because of all the innate immune activation. It signals to your body that you're sick. And so, as a result of that, it triggers the pituitary gland to release more cortisol instead of stimulating the gonads to produce testosterone. So you start to see a reduction in the production of testosterone. You start to see a dramatic reduction in sperm counts as well.
Wow.
In fact, this is one of the really strong explanations. There's many reasons why testosterone production has gone down on average, but this is one of the reasons why men on average now have much lower testosterone levels than they did a few decades ago, right? And likely one of the explanations for why sperm counts are dropping precipitously. Sperm counts over the last 50 years has dropped consistently 1% per year, right?
Mhm.
So a 25-year-old today has half the sperm count as a 25-year-old that was living 50 years ago, and it keeps dropping 1% a year, right? In 50 years, we could have such negligible sperm count where men are not able to get women pregnant, which is
Wow.
absolutely insane to think about, right? And then
Yeah.
also why you see all of the gynecomastia and all the issues that you see with low testosterone in men, and all the low T problems. That gelding issue is very much a gut related issue, and it's
What about
related to the gut.
PCOS for women? Because that's the that's
Yep.
the driving factor behind infertility, number one driving factor behind infertility in women, which is also on the rise.
Yep.
Is that gut based, do you think?
100%, which is one of the reasons why some of the key markers around PCOS are certain inflammatory cytokines, right? So
Hmm.
IL-6, TNF alpha, IL-1, those are the quintessential cytokines that elevate as a result of leaky gut. And insulin resistance is also
Hmm.
a very predominant thing. And the leaky gut leads to insulin resistance. It's one of the first steps in developing insulin resistance.
Wow.
And that's even published by the American Diabetic Association, which,
Shocking.
they tend to be behind on these things.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so absolutely. So in the way I view it is severe gut dysfunction in your late teens, early 20s in men that leads to profound leaky gut will lead to this gelding issue where you have this precipitous drop in testosterone and then all of the issues that men get as a result of that. For women, I think that often presents more as PCOS,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
I think that
it's the
too. Yeah.
same origin, same problem that expresses
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah, and there's like a huge piece of just the environmental toxins that are affecting the hormones that are now being seen with the PCOS as well, right?
Yeah.
They're
Hmm.
being able to find all this toxic load that basically comes from in utero.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if you talk to Liz, I'm sure she explained this as like four types, three or four types of PCOS. And so I think she's put together a ebook on the different types of
Oh,
PCOS.
no, we
You would
did
approach
not.
them a
That's
little bit
probably, I don't
differently.
think we actually did talk about that. I'm going to have her back on the show. Don't you worry. So,
That would have
but
been
I would like
hour
to read
five
that.
of
Yeah,
your
yeah, exactly.
discussion.
But I want to read the book. So I'll have to find that because that's interesting. PCOS is a very interesting
Hmm.
disease in my eyes. Same with endometriosis that I think, yeah, it's
Yep.
very gut, very immune system, toxic load
Yeah,
driven.
it's def those conditions like severe allergies, like spectrum
Yes.
disorders, like most autoimmune conditions are all diseases of the modern day. You
Yeah.
know, these are not conditions that our ancestors likely suffered from, and it doesn't have to do with aging. You know, like we might say, oh, there was no such thing as dementia, 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Well, it's probably because people didn't live long enough to develop dementia. But these conditions that are developing in people in their late teens, early 20s are likely things that didn't exist back in the day because these are effects of the modern environment and the modern age.
Wow. Okay. Well, we could probably go for another hour, but
Yeah.
once
But the
again, we'll just
audience
have
is
to have
probably like,
you back on.
I got to get out and go to the woods right now and eat some
Right?
fiber,
Yeah,
eat
and go
some
eat some
bark in the
fiber.
woods. This conversation's freaked me out. So, but no, the best news about all of this, it's all fixable, right?
I know,
Because it's
because
an
it sounds
ecological
so
problem.
complicated and overwhelming, and you're like, oh my God, we're just screwed. But
Yeah.
then the solution is very simple.
It's very simple, and I think the mistake that's made, and more often what I see as I engage with people in the health and wellness space is people get overwhelmed of all the things they have to do, right? And every
Yeah,
time they're
yeah.
hearing something new of this device now that's the most important device to add, or that one peptide that's the most important thing in that one, so it becomes like overwhelming. I would say, like from the gut perspective. So I teach a course called the Build Your Resilient Gut for consumers. It's like a simple 6 module course to help them understand the gut microbiome, the digestive process, there's immune system and all that. And then I give them all of these resources on like what to do. And I break it down into 5 pillars. And the basic idea is that you want to do one or two things that are fall under each of these pillars, right? And pillar number one is diet, for example. Pillar number two is certain lifestyle things, so sleep or exercise or both. Pillar number three, we talk about exposure to things and so on. So with the gut microbiome, it's small decisions that accumulate together to make big changes, right? So it's like addition of fiber, addition of prebiotic, add in a probiotic, eat a more diverse diet, add in a new food into your diet this week that you haven't eaten in a while. Then maintain that and then add another new food next week, right? Manage your stress, go out for a walk. Like things like that that are simple, but cumulatively they make a profound impact,
Yeah.
right? And so it's small little decisions that you need to put together in order to perpetuate the overall response.
Yeah. And I would think if a woman is having troubles metabolizing her HRT, these are the things that we need to start with for
Hmm.
so many different issues in the body, not just the gut, right?
Hmm.
Like just the stress response and all the things that start to impact us more as we age. And those are always the foundational pieces. And it's people want to hear that, oh, just take this or just, this, like you said, like crazy device and you'll be fine. It's like, actually, just nail down the basics first,
Yep.
foremost.
Totally. Those are the foundations. That 5 pillar system is a foundation. And it's like if you're not doing something in each of those pillars, then all this other exotic stuff you might be thinking about and trying to do and heard from this one influencer and that one influencer, they
Hmm.
don't matter as much because you don't have the basics down,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
These 5 pillars are like the foundations of what everyone should be doing.
And the gut is everything. And so listen to the one that I'm going to do, you guys. This will come out after this one, but on the one that I'm going to do on the vagus nerve with your friend.
Yeah.
Um,
Menopause.
because
Yeah.
yeah, that has so much to do with the gut too. So it'll be a good one to follow this episode. So thank you very much for coming on the show, and I look forward to having you back.
Thank you for having me.